So last year, I found myself a queer, reform feminist with basically no background in formal Jewish education in the middle of a certificate program at Yeshiva University for some of the best and brightest Jewish educators in the country. Looking back on it now, it's kind of funny, but at the time I was like, what are you doing here? Get out of there. As an adult Jewish woman, I like to fool myself into thinking that there couldn't possibly be any more room for neuroses in my life, but there you have it, 31 years old and in the middle of an identity crisis. I was super intimidated being there. I mean, I was thinking to myself, who am I to be in the role of Jewish educator when I can't even really explain to you what the Talmud is? Can these people tell by my blank expression that I don't know how to read Hebrew without the vowels? Never mind the fact that I've been working in experiential Jewish education for the past 6 years, or the fact that I'm really good at my job. Didn't matter. Compared to the rest of my YU cohort members, I was a hack, a tremendous hack. But it wasn't until I graduated from YU that I was able to understand that there's a problem in the way that we approach Jewish education in this country. And my neuroses aside, it's not entirely my fault. The problem is that there's a dysfunctional relationship between cultural Judaism and content Judaism. And I'm guessing that for most of you, this isn't news. Like, we get it. The conversation has been on the table for a long time now. We get that it can be problematic when young people identify only as culturally Jewish. And we also get that for people like me who were raised culturally Jewish, Torah can be really intimidating and inaccessible. But as I understand it in my role as a Jewish educator, the problem isn't with the young people. The problem is with the adults. And that problem has two parts. The first part of the problem is that there's this generalized, widely accepted belief among cultural Jews that Torah is boring and unrelatable. And the idea is that if we're going to keep young people involved in the Jewish community long enough for them to marry other Jews and have their own baby Jews, we're going to need to keep them entertained, and Torah is not going to cut it. And as somebody who was raised culturally Jewish, I'm the first one to admit that this way of thinking is complete BS. I mean, we know that teenagers are hungry for deep, meaningful content, not just entertainment content. They don't need an apology from us every time we want to teach Torah. But they do need it to be taught well. But we're going to get to that. And I need to admit that as a Jewish educator who falls into the, I'm Jewish, but I don't really know Jewish, but I can try to teach Jewish camp, I'm not as competent or as confident as I should be when it comes to teaching Torah, and my students can totally pick up on my insecurities around teaching it. Like a sinking ship, every time I need to call in the rabbi in order to teach something that I can't but should be able to, I'm only perpetuating that dysfunctional relationship between cultural Judaism and content Judaism. The second part of the problem is that because we think Torah is boring and unrelatable, we continue to hire the most interesting, entertaining, funny communicators as Jewish educators, and we continue to think that that skill set is sufficient. I, for example, was hired by my eternally optimistic boss because she thought I'd be good working with high school students, and she was right. I definitely was not hired, though, because I'm a Torah scholar. I mean, I've had to learn how to apply the Jewish lens on my own over the past 6 years, and I'm still not great at it. Are my students having fun in my programs regardless? Absolutely. But are they seeing modeled in front of them a confident adult Jewish role model who's not only excited about Jewish peoplehood, but knowledgeable enough to apply the teachings to the issues that matter most to them? Definitely not. So what do we do about this? If there is a tension between super talented communicator who doesn't know a lot about Torah on the one hand and Torah scholar who puts small Jewish children to sleep when she speaks, on the other hand, do we work with the super talented communicator and teach them content, or do we work with the Torah scholar and teach them communication skills? I don't think that you need me to tell you that it's much easier to teach somebody content than it is how to be interesting, so we are definitely on the right track by hiring super talented communicators as our educators. But like the great Shuki Taylor says, our job as educators is not to meet our students where they're at. Our job as educators is to meet our students where they're at and then move them forward. We Jewish educators cannot do that unless we ourselves are moved. Now that we're hiring super talented communicators as Jewish educators, how do we invest in their professional development as Torah-inspired educators? Let's consider Moshe Rabeno for a minute. So Moses must have been a pretty talented, appealing guy. I mean, he was hand-selected by God to lead thousands of whiny Israelites through the desert into the promised land only after he convinced Pharaoh to let them go free. Moses had charisma, but he definitely didn't have all the skills he needed in order to get the job done on his own. The guy had a speech impediment. It debilitated him. And he was constantly being supported by more knowledgeable people like Miriam and Jethro and Aaron. But God knew. God knew that Moses was the right guy for the job. He just needed the opportunity. He needed the confidence to explore his innate skills and talents as a communicator and as an educator. Here's the thing. It's not just young people who need to be met where they're at and then nudged forward by talented educators to wander through the deserts of their Jewish identity formation. There's a saying in the Torah, which is actually probably where Shuki Taylor got some of his words, and it's come to be known as Kol na'ar lefi darko. Teach every child according to where he's at and in his own way. This sentiment it should not only apply to students. It must also apply to educators who need to continue to see themselves as students. So while we are, quite frankly, denying some young people of connecting deeply with Jewish content, we Jewish educators need more than one-off professional development opportunities in order to do it right and in order to do it confidently. We need deeply immersive professional development centered on Jewish Torah learning and Jewish identity development so that we can internalize the content for ourselves, not just regurgitate it to our students and pay lip service to the teachings. And I'm guessing that by now I've alienated some of you or made you feel a little uncomfortable. I mean, you're thinking to yourselves, I'm a cultural Jew and I don't need Torah in order to be Jewish. And you're right. You're totally right. I'm actually a great example of that. But what if? What if we could strengthen the ways our young people identify as Jews simply by helping those who teach them to strengthen the ways that they identify as Jews? Kol na'ar lefi darko. Talented Jewish educators need to be identified for their natural skills and talents as communicators, and then supported, like Moshe Rabeno, to think about themselves as Jews first and as educators second. And for many of us Jewish educators who were raised culturally Jewish, this takes chutzpah. It actually takes a lot of it. If I'm being honest with you, I was really embarrassed to be at Yeshiva University for like the first 6 months that I was there, because I didn't possess the same skills and knowledge as my cohort members, because I was raised by really entertaining yet pretty incompetent youth group advisors and camp counselors who told me that Torah is boring and unrelatable. But the educators at YU were able to meet me where I was at and to move me forward because they themselves were moved by the content they were teaching me. Imagine how much stronger my Jewish identity would be as an adult. Imagine how much better I'd be at my job if the camp counselors and the youth group advisors had been able to do the same. So here's what I've learned. after being met where I was and then moved forward. It's not that I have to invest in my Jewish knowledge or my Jewish identity development. It's that I get to. I'm choosing Judaism, and because of that, my students are as curious as I am about what it means to be Jewish and not just culturally Jewish. I never could have done that without institutional investment in my Jewish identity development as a Jew and as a Jewish educator. What a gift. What a privilege. And one every Jewish educator should have. Thank you.